I see, this enamorment with the data, and it's look at how bad we are. Look at how bad we are. Look at how bad we are. And again, applying leadership science here is, outcomes lean in the direction of inquiry. So if you keep talking about how bad you are, you're only going to get worse.
Right.
So let's talk about what is a great future.
Welcome to the Science of Leadership, the podcast dedicated to helping you become a better leader. Here, you'll gain valuable knowledge, hear inspiring stories, and learn the scientific principles that promote exceptional leadership. I'm Tom Collins, your host, and I'm thrilled to have you join us on this journey to becoming a better leader. Today's topic is one that has been gaining a lot of attention in recent years: the value of having a coach. As someone who's both benefited from executive coaching and serves as an executive coach to others, I know the power coaching has to accelerate your leadership. Joining me today to discuss this is someone who has dedicated his career to helping leaders reach their full potential: David Parks, executive coach at Circle Up Coaching. David has worked with hundreds of leaders at renowned companies like Microsoft, Qualcomm, and Stanford Medicine, guiding them to overcome challenges, refine their leadership approach, and achieve transformative results. David, thank you for joining me today on the Science of Leadership and for sharing your expertise on the incredible benefits of coaching for leaders.
Delighted to be here, Tom. Thank you.
Well, before we drill down on this idea of coaching, if you would, can you tell us a bit about your background, how you got into leadership coaching and so forth?
Wow, that's a great question. And maybe just go right back to the beginning because I believe every part of your life is preparation for what you do today. So I'll give you the quick potted history. I grew up in a small country town in Northern Ireland, so a long, long way away from California and Silicon Valley. And if you told me, back then at age, 10, 11, 12, that I'd be sitting in California as a leadership coach, that was a very remote thing to me. But as I think back to that period, and again, shaping me and preparing me for the role, yeah, I was born to great parents. My father was in the Royal Air Force, served during World War II, and completed 40 operational missions as part of Bomber Command. So, in many ways, he was lucky to survive that and
Sure.
had tremendous discipline and military regime with him.
Mhm.
My mother trained as a nurse, so she came from a family of nurses and doctors, so was an inherent carer. So I share that because sometimes, Tom, I look at the work we do in leadership development. I'm 45 minutes into a workshop or whatever, and I see a lot of dysfunctional behaviors coming to the fore.
Yeah.
And that little voice in my head says, we're making up for what their parents didn't do. So
Yeah.
I believe I got a great grounding. I went to a great school that was principled and based on values, going right back to 1608. So a long history and legacy.
Wow.
It was a rugby playing school. Rugby was my religion back in the day. And I guess my first taste of leadership was captaining the first 15 at school. And that was, even today, I think about that. Some of my finest moments were on the rugby pitch. I had some military training. I was in the officer training corps. And then I went into the working world over in England and spent 12 years in England working for a handful of companies. The first one was Marks and Spencer, a 60,000 person retail outfit. And I joined them because at that time, they were reputed to have the best management development program in Europe.
Mm.
So I thought, well, if I can attach myself to that organization, I'm going to get some great training. So I worked with Marks and Spencers. I worked with the division of Omnicom. I worked with a company that set up health and fitness centers. And then the real pivot point to answer your question, actually, it's an interesting story. I had 6 weeks vacation every year in the UK,
Mhm.
and every year I'd like to plan some adventure. And this one year I said to my brother and my best friend, why don't we cycle down the coast of California?
Oh,
And I
yeah.
planned this trip, measured with a piece of cotton thread and an old school atlas, came to San Francisco, had never been here before. I grew up watching Dirty Harry movies, so I had this perception that it was the big bad city. Cycled to Los Angeles, came back up, and went back to London. And I kept thinking about this trip to California. I thought, I'd just love to live there, and I was age 32. I thought, okay, I'm going to research the visas. And I won a lottery visa, which offered by the US government. So it wasn't contingent on a job or any
Mhm.
qualifications. And it gave me the opportunity to write the next chapter of my career. So that's the long story to how did you get into leadership development and coaching? I joined Tom Peters, the best-selling business author in the world down in Palo Alto, who wrote In Search of Excellence. And that
Mhm.
really was my entree
Great
into the
book.
field of leadership development.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thanks for sharing that, some of your story with us. Certainly, I hear a personal desire for leadership development, right? You talked about that, Marks and Spencer and so forth, and getting the opportunity to work with Tom Peters, which is phenomenal. And I recommend that book to anybody, and I'll put the reference in our show notes. That really gives us some context. So now let's get into the discussion a bit more with a sort of foundational question. I think, what exactly does a leadership coach do, and how is that really kind of different from other roles like a mentor or a consultant, would you say?
What does a leadership coach do? Well, my mind goes to an article that was written, it's probably about 22 years ago. It was published in the Harvard Business Review, and it was called The Wild West of Executive Coaching. And it kind of painted this picture of leadership and executive coaching being all over the map. Um, what does a leadership coach do? And as I think about it, here we are in 2025, and I think it's not the wild, wild west of executive coaching. It's the wild, 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 wild west. It's gotten even more
A lot
complicated,
wilder.
confusing. But at its essence, I believe that leadership coaching is like holding up a behavioral mirror to
Mm.
create self-awareness for leaders so that they can see maybe where they're tripping themselves up, what their blind spots are, what their skills, talents, and passions are, that they can really lean into those. So creating that self-awareness through a behavioral mirror. The other thing that leadership coaches do, good leadership coaches, is build clarity. So
Mm.
having clarity, if a leader can't articulate where an organization is going, they're not going to mobilize people forward. And then the third thing is leadership coaches help the leader really figure out what action they need to take. If you think about leadership, it's an action-based activity.
Mhm.
Leaders take action. Great leaders take bold action, and that takes courage. So it's nudging, coaching, cajoling, holding people accountable to actually take those brave actions. That's kind
Yeah.
of my plotted definition of what a leadership coach does.
Yeah. Appreciate you sharing that, providing that context for our listeners. There are a couple things that came to mind as you were saying that. The first was actually this idea of holding up the mirror. I think a lot of times people think a coach is supposed to give them the answers, right? And that's not it at all. Most coaches, we have a metaphor that we will share with the people that we're going to coach or whatever. And the one that I have developed is the key ring. So a lot of times people will be familiar with someone, often a janitorial type person or maintenance person, right, who has this gigantic keychain, ring on their hip, and it's got like, I don't know, a million keys on it, right? And the job of the coach is to come along and shine the flashlight so that the person reaches on their own hip and pulls the key they already have to unlock the lock that they're trying to get through, right? And so that's kind of how I do a lot of mentoring, which is kind of where that question came from. I do a lot of mentoring, I do coaching, and the two are different. And to try to provide that context, so that's a metaphor that I use that I've kind of developed over time.
You've
Uh,
just reminded me of something, and there's a great model out there because if you have a group of managers and leaders and ask them, how many of you know how to coach? They'll all put up their hand and say, "Yeah, I'm a great coach. I'm a great coach." Why are you a great coach? Because I tell other people what to do. Coaching is not telling other people what to do. And the model I lean towards, and this is from a former business partner and coach, Greg Thompson, who I think
mhm.
wrote a book called The Master Coach. And in that book,
Another good book.
yeah, a great book. He has a model, and it's called the coaching impact model, and it really breaks it down. When you're directing, when you're advising, when you're teaching, when you're mentoring and coaching, and it's kind of a delineation. And actually, pictorially, you can see where you are. It's like a coach meter. Am I directing, or am I coaching?
Yeah,
And you're a physician. There's times to direct or be directive. So if you're the surgeon in surgery and you
yeah,
say scalpel, that's
right,
directive. You need that
right,
scalpel. But if you're in a different situation, there's a time to be more coach-like when you
yeah,
start asking the team, What do you think? Yeah, help me think this through. What are your
right,
thoughts? Has anybody done this before?" And you tap into the wisdom of the team. That's coaching.
yeah. There was one other thought that I had when you were talking about leadership coaching and what a leader does, and you were talking about action, taking action. I just finished a book that was written in 1961, actually, by Field Marshal Montgomery, who you will be aware of. A lot of our listeners, perhaps, especially in the U.S., may not be aware that Field Marshal Montgomery was the supreme leader of the British military in World War II, and who actually wanted to be supreme LA commander, but Eisenhower got that. And so, but he wrote this book called Pathway to Leadership, and in it, he describes that it is the job of the excellent leader to, think, decide, and act, so that action is, in his words, part and parcel to being a really good leader. So I thought about that, and as you were talking, I knew you would be aware of Field Marshal Montgomery.
Well,
So,
it's funny you should bring that up because there's a picture back in our house in Ireland of an aunt of mine who was in the Queen Alexandria Medical Corps
mhm.
in North Africa, of her with Field Marshal Montgomery.
Oh, how about
So
that?
don't talk about role modeling in a household or imagery that speaks to stepping up to a higher cause and
Yeah,
leadership. Yeah, that's the kind of influence. So I'm glad you're reading stuff like that because there's so much we can learn from history.
right. And if we don't, we'll repeat the bad stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, could you kind of walk our listeners through just practically what the process looks like for leadership coaching, like when you're doing it with folks?
Well, it can go two ways, Tom. A lot of coaches come with a very formulaic approach. They have their little
Mm,
toolbox, their chosen 360 and the discovery process and a mapped out process over time. Sometimes I use a more formal process, but sometimes I just go where the energy is
yeah.
and ask that leader what's going to have most impact in your business. Where do you want to work, or what do you want to work on, and start the journey there. Leaders are measured by the outcomes they achieve. So if we don't get clarity on the why of the coaching, is
Mhm.
this just some nice, polite conversation, a little bit of kind of sandpapering the rough edges and making this leader a bit better, a bit nicer, or whatever? Coaching really, and organizations are paying good money for this. There has to be
Right.
some
Yeah.
return on investment.
Sure.
So a lot of the time, I'm looking at the leader and saying, what are you going to be measured on in 6, 9, 12 months' time? What are the big goals that you're after? And then very intentionally drawing a line back to the behaviors that are going to drive those business goals.
Yeah.
What is it you need to do to make 20% improvement in the business, in profitability or sales increase? What does that look like? And by the way, how are you communicating this to your team?
Right.
Is your current message getting through? When did you last articulate a version of that message? It's funny, here we are in January, a lot of leaders are launching into the year and
Sure.
they've got their vision for 2025 and they probably delivered it last week or the week before, excited at the start of the year. My question as a coach is, when are they going to hear it again and again and
Right.
again? Are you going to do it virtually? Or are you going to do it in person? How do they access that vision? How do they get excited by that vision? So it's all about quality and quantity,
Yeah.
frequency of leadership interaction.
That's good. That's helpful. I was wondering, as you were describing that, do you have a good story from your career that kind of showcases where coaching has helped a leader overcome a major challenge?
Can I give you two examples?
Oh, you can give two, three.
Yeah.
We got all the time in the world.
One immediately from last week, I've been coaching a gentleman in a financial services company from about October, November last year. And he called me up about a week ago. I said, I did a January check-in with him. But in November, he called me up. It was kind of an emergency triage coaching call.
Mhm.
And he said, David, I have this woman on my team. I think I'm going to have to fire her. I said, well, tell me more. Give me the context. Why do you think you have to fire her? And he had inherited her on the team from a merger.
Mm.
So she came with some baggage and she was showing up with what he called a bad attitude. Don't like her tone. She's missed some meetings. She doesn't recognize that I'm the boss.
Right.
So he was frustrated. And I think in some respects, he was looking for me to give him permission to do the dirty deed and
Right.
fire her. And of course, as we've just discussed, coaches, we don't get into that realm. We're not going to advise on whether to coach. So I said, do you believe that you've had all the conversations you need to have with her? It sounds like there's something going on and you're not at the bottom of it. He thought, you know, I do need to speak to her again. So he called me up last week to give me the punchline to this story. He spent 2 hours on the phone with her. They worked through it. There were tears. She stayed with the company. She recommitted, and he says she's going great guns. And he did share with me that this one individual commands $6 million of revenue. And I'm just thinking to myself, wow, if she'd walked out the door or if he'd pushed her out the door, there goes $6 million
Right.
worth of revenue. which is about 10% of his responsibility. So it would have been a big chunk of change to
Yeah.
lose for the organization. So that's one immediate story. Another one, then, Tom, this will be resonant to you from the medical world, and it comes from Mayo Clinic. I've worked with Mayo for 12, 13, 14 years. And we started there doing leadership development for department chairs for physicians who really hadn't been to leadership school,
Right.
stepping up to the department chair role to help them build those skills because Mayo came to the realization that there were some had struggled over the years, so they need to provide that support. So launched this program based on coaching to help these department chairs show up as better coaches, and we've been doing it for 3, 4, 5 years, and providing coaching to the department chairs. And my client, who was out of leadership development, so not a physician, but kind of ancillary in the leadership development side, said, "This is really going well, and we think there might be an application of the work that you do in coaching to target physician burnout." And she said, "Physician burnout is one of our biggest challenges here."
Yeah.
And I'll not get into, all the ramifications of that, but, medical errors,
Right.
at the very worst, dare I say it's suicide. We
Hmm.
hear more stories of physician suicide. So this was really important work. And I was coaching, consulting with her. And she said, "Yeah, we're really interested in doing this, but we got to gather more data." I said, "Let me stop you right there." I exercised what we coaches would call confrontation or constructive confrontation. I said, "You do not need to gather more data." I said, "In a year's time, if I were a betting man, I would place the bet that it's only going to get worse. Your statistics are going to be even worse, and heaven forbid, your physicians, your surgeons showing up and they're in not good states, and your
Right.
number one value is patient centric care." I said, "You got to do something about this."
Right.
So I really kind of pitched it to her, and of course she said, "Let me think about it." 2, 3 days later, I get the phone call, and that push, that cajole, that holding up the fact that you don't need to collect more data, you need to do something
Yeah.
now. This
Right.
is triage. It put in motion the physician well-being initiative at Mayo Clinic, which ended up, it's been rolling every year for the last 8, 9, 10 years. It was measured by 2 physicians there, Tate Shanafelt and Lotta
Hmm.
Derby,
Yeah.
and their results were written up in the Journal of the American Medical Association. And here's the punchline, Tom. It reduced symptoms of burnout by 23%, and it increased quality of life score by 15.5%. So big headlines, coaching works, the physicians were loving it, and it continues to this day. And in fact, as I even think about this story, you were at Stanford Medicine,
That's
right?
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
We've had Tate on a previous episode.
Well,
Yeah.
exactly. But think about it. Tate moved from Mayo Clinic to
Right.
Stanford.
Mhm.
He took that body of work and that energy and that passion for targeting burnout and building coaching capability. You and I would not be speaking today only for that having happened. Think
Right.
about it.
Yeah.
That's where we first met at Stanford.
Yeah. That's right. That's right.
The waves of influence.
Yeah. You never know how, I mean, when you look back over time, how things transpire, you wouldn't have predicted per se.
Yeah, I kind of get a little anthropological on that because I'm always curious to know why things happen the way they happen. How did we get to where we are today?
Right.
What's working, what's not working? And I think that curiosity as a coach really serves me well.
Sure. Yeah. Well, curiosity, as a coach, curiosity is perhaps the number one thing that we need to possess, right? It's like, it's figuring out the right question, those simple but powerful questions to
Yeah,
ask that get people thinking about the answers that they already have.
yeah,
So
so true.
when I talk to people with regard to coaching, whether they're in academic, medical, centers or other sort of places, I usually talk about sort of two forms or purposes that executive coaching, leadership coaching can take. And there's what I call remedial coaching,
Mhm.
which is what, comes to mind for, I think, a lot of people. That is, somebody's a bad actor. Some people might call it charm school or other sorts of, things that somebody just can't, I think you used this analogy earlier, can't play well with somebody in the sandbox, right? They're just not good with other people and they need to learn, just be a reasonable human being. Don't be a jerk, right? So that's the sort of remedial side of it. And then there's, I think, probably more what we're geared toward, and it's what I call developmental coaching, which is helping those good people identify the one or two dials or levers that they need to move just a little bit so they can really become great. So personally, and I think this is probably true for you, try to spend my time doing that developmental coaching.
Yeah, there's been wholesale shift in the whole coaching industry. 10, 15, 20 years ago, a lot of coaches were called in for remedial purposes. And sometimes it's just to justify an exit. Well, we
Sure.
brought in a
We
coach,
tried.
fast, just got to let him go. And then something happened. I can't put an exact timing on it, but coaching became more, dare I use the word fashionable, or there was a certain contagion caught on. I think it's certainly helped. There's a great tailwind from people like Marshall Goldsmith, for
Yeah.
example, who's well known and has written books and speaks extensively on it around the benefits of coaching and emotional intelligence. For example, you think about building coach-like skills through emotional intelligence. That wasn't part of our vocabulary 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
So definitely there's more of a bias, and it's almost like, well, if you don't have a coach, yeah, there's something wrong.
Right. My first interaction with receiving what I would call structured coaching was at Stanford. And Stanford has a very good approach to identify people that they see as high potential, if you will, and offer coaching for them to go from good to great, so to speak. And that experience, I think, was great for me. It really broadened my horizons. It helped me to identify things. And I still have Mona, sitting on my shoulder asking me those questions, those simple questions, right?
When you experience it, then you get it. It's a little hard sometimes. It's like your question earlier. What do coaches really do? And you've just got to dive into the deep end of the pool and work through with a coach. That's why trusting relationships, somebody that you really put your trust in and connect with. Again, there's a little model I keep in my head. And again, this is from Greg Thompson, you know, character, why should you be coached by this person? Has the coach really earned the right to coach? Do you trust them? Really believe in them? Do they have the ability to connect with you in a way that you will transform as a result? And then the third part is to engage in a coach-like conversation. What is a coach-like conversation? It's not telling people what to do; it's asking those thought-provoking questions. The
Yeah.
stance of a coach very often is it's like two professionals sitting side by side saying, "Tom, what do you see going on here? Here's what I see." And it's that kind of exchange versus, "This is what you need to do, Tom, to be a better leader. Shape up on that communications."
Right. Okay, David, now that we've laid the groundwork here for what coaching is, and you've hit on this a little bit, I'm hoping that you can maybe kind of add some more to it. But for our listeners, why should a leader have a coach? In your experience, what are the most significant benefits that leaders gain from working with a coach?
Yeah. Have you ever heard that expression? Once you become the boss, it's the last time you'll ever hear the truth.
I can't say that I have, but that's an
Well,
interesting
there's an
truism.
expression there. Once you become CEO, it's the last time you'll ever hear the truth.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you're right. Everything becomes filtered.
If you think about all those SVPs and VPs reporting into that newly minted, freshly appointed CEO, there's going to be a lot of yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir acknowledgement, or stick with the status quo and stick with the truth, stick with the safe path. A coach has the ability to work with that leader and do an audit of what's really going on, taking off the masks around what's truth and what's real and what do we really need to do. So it can bring some hard truths to the table.
Yeah.
Um, we all have a high discomfort level about going into the murky stuff, the gray stuff, the undiscussables.
Yeah.
I think working with a coach forces a new kind of conversation, where you've been putting up with systems, processes, behaviors, people that are not serving your business goal.
Mhm.
Having a really good coach confronts you around those things and g- provides the courage to say, okay, I'm going to stop doing this and I'm going to start doing that. It's a nudge or a move towards a more positive behavior that's going to drive a better outcome. A lot of how I look, or I use a 360 from the leadership circle
Mhm.
to bring some clarity, where you'll have leaders who are very, very driven. They're all about the task, about getting work done. And of course, that has a consequence and a burn on people. And at the other end of the spectrum, you have leaders who are very relational, and it's nice and warm and cozy and fuzzy, but no work gets done. So it's helping leaders figure out, how do you get stuff done but how do you maintain great relationships at the same time? To find that creative tension in the middle that works for everybody. The other part of that model is being aware of what great leaders do. And it provides a shortcut or a roadmap that helps leaders understand that, relationships are important. You get
Mhm.
work done through people. How you show up is important. Your mood is contagious. If you come in, angry and unhappy, that's going to have an effect on the team. The number one thing that people look for in a leader is honesty. Are you being true to yourself? So authenticity and integrity. Um, Leaders work through systems. If you have a bad system that's not serving the organization, leaders have the courage to change it, to take those bold steps rather than sit with the status quo. And at the end of the day, leaders motivate and inspire people through their primary instrument, which is their voice.
Yeah.
So helping leaders craft a message that is uplifting, inspiring, and motivating and taps into the emotions of their people. It gets them to step up and go above and beyond what is normally expected. So working all those muscles around communications, around systems, around being your best authentic self through coaching and growing people and building a great culture. Because culture, at the end of the day, is arm's length, and culture is made up conversation by conversation. So it's made or broken in the moment.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that perspective on the value of having a coach and some discussion on what does it look like for a leader. I think part of really excellent leadership coaching is having somebody who understands what leadership is supposed to be, right? And so bringing that to the table, so it's pretty clear that you have a great amount of expertise in that. And that I think that's really beneficial. I can say I kind of hit on this a minute ago when I said it was like having Mona, my coach, on my shoulder. Personally, I've seen great value in having coaching. It's not only helped me through, these complex situations of a given
Mhm.
moment in my career, but more than that, and I think this is the really, I think, the real value of having a coach is it gives you the tools if you're willing to embrace them and think about them and look at it. It gives you the tools that you can use moving forward to be better at facing similar or more challenging things down the road. So again, that's the Mona on my shoulder is that I have that tool set,
Yeah,
and it's been such a positive experience for me. And I've seen the same thing happen with those folks that I've had the privilege of coaching.
yeah, yeah, yeah. When you know how, life is easier. And I always talk about, I ask people, what's your hip pocket model for leadership? To see what sort of answer comes back. And, oftentimes I'll get the answer, well, I've read this book, or I'd adhere to this model or that model. And honestly, Tom, over the years, I've figured that the best thing is to read widely, take in the research,
Mhm.
filter it through your lens of what's really going to work for you and your organization, because there are no silver bullets.
Right.
And I have seen historically, where people have gone through the canned leadership workshop and their first day back at work on Monday, and the teams are rolling their eyes and say, yeah, he went on a workshop last week. He's just trying out his new model, his new experiment. He'll be over it in a couple of days' time, and they're resistant to that change. Whereas when you can embrace it and try it on and make it your own and become the best version of yourself, that's so much more impactful. And again, just reminding you, the number one thing that people look for is that authenticity in a leader.
Yeah.
And, we read more and more today about vulnerability and transparency. Leaders have to be comfortable showing up as themselves.
Yeah. This value that we're talking about of coaching and leaders and helping leaders become better leaders on more authentic and embracing their best version of themselves. In addition to the information you shared about Tate's work at Mayo and how coaching has an impact, this conversation really aligns well with research on the effectiveness of coaching. So some studies, that have been done have shown that leaders who work with coaches experience improvements, and you mentioned this, in emotional intelligence, also decision making and overall team performance. There was this study in 2015, a meta-analysis, and so for those who have been listening for a number of our podcasts, they should be by now familiar with the idea of a meta-analysis. But basically, the authors took 17 different studies and analyzed those all together and looked at the effectiveness of workplace coaching. And so Rebecca Jones was the first author on that, and she and her colleagues confirmed that coaching results in improvements in four major categories. Those were affective outcomes like well-being, satisfaction, things of that nature, which we kind of hit on earlier. Cognitive outcomes like problem solving, decision making, all these are important. Skill-based outcomes and results, that is, improvements in individual, team, and organizational performance. And so those were all, improved with coaching. And then there are similarly studies have been done by the ICF, so that's the International Coaching Federation, which is the largest professional organization for executive and leadership coaches. And they've reported that leaders who receive executive coaching see a 70% increase in individual performance with regard to communication
Hmm.
and goal attainment, 50% increase in team performance, and 48% increase in organizational performance with increased revenue and employee retention. To put a dollars and cents figure on this, and these data are dated because they come from a 2006 study, but still, I think valuable to think about. Vernita Parker Wilkins published a paper in the Journal of Industrial and Commercial Training, and they reported this is incredible, a 689% return on investment for executive coaching, which at that time was a return of over $3.2 million. That would be over
Hmm.
$5.2 million today. So
Yeah.
leaders, when they receive coaching, it really pays off in extraordinary ways based on the science.
Yeah. As I listen to you, Tom, I mean, you've just given us the statistics. You do a Google search, you can find, a gazillion articles and research around the ROI of coaching.
Mhm.
Uh, my take on that is I challenge clients instead of relying on, Harvard Business Review or strategy and finance or some report from ICF is create your own banner statistic. If you are thinking about coaching, get a pilot group of people together, give them coaching over 3 or 6 months, and then ask the question, what impact has this coaching created? Behaviorally, how are people showing up differently? And there's many ways you can measure that. And what business outcome can you point to as a result of this coaching?
Yeah.
And you might be surprised at the answers. Some people will say, well, when I started this job, I had 3 direct reports. Now I got 23 direct reports. So my span of control has expanded. I couldn't have done this job without the help and guidance and the wisdom and the insights that I got from the coaching. Or organizations that are struggling with retention. How do you target retention? If you've got awful attrition and retention numbers, look to the research from Gallup. The number one reason why people leave their job is lack of relationship with their boss. So coaching and leadership development, we're in the business of creating better bosses. So, do that consistently and high quality over 3, 6, 9 months, you're going to impact the numbers. So I guess my punchline there is, yeah, these reports are interesting to read, but again, it's all about action. It's about making it real in your organization. So I'm a great advocate for doing your own measurement, creating your own banner headline about your personal results from leadership coaching.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that tells us a lot about kind of your approach to coaching, right? It's a very practical, very situational, personal kind of approach is what I'm hearing, right? When you're describing that.
Yeah, if I'm fully transparent with you, Tom, I do say to colleagues and friends sometimes you put too many PhDs in one place at one time, nothing ever gets done. So, and I know this world can be a little laden with, and this is the Science of Leadership podcast.
Right. Sure.
Well, I'm kind of being a heretic here. I am
Yeah.
pragmatic to the nth degree. So I'm very, very intentional about where are we going? What does business success look like? And then drawing that line back to behaviors.
Yeah.
I respect the research, but I don't become a slave to it.
Yeah. Well, earlier when you were talking about the person at Mayo that you were challenging, why do you need more data? That is, that's actually a characteristic of especially people in medicine and other places. They feel safety, I think, to some degree in data. And when they don't know what to do, their answer is always get more data.
Get
And
more
I
data.
think just as you challenge, like, why it's bad. How bad does it need to be before you do something, right? So I appreciate that. I would say that I'm a pragmatist as well, very much so.
You know what, Tom? Sometimes I see, this enamorment with the data, and it's look at how bad we are. Look at how bad we are. Look at how bad we are. And again, applying leadership science here is, outcomes lean in the direction of inquiry. So if you keep talking about how bad you are, you're only going to get worse.
Right.
So let's talk about what is a great future. a
Yeah.
great future is, reducing the burnout in the organization. It's increasing retention, it's increasing sales, lifting everybody's boat. So that's where I want to move is to the positive. And again, that's at the heart of all the work from Gallup and Strength Finders
Yeah.
and Mark Buckingham and the like. So
Yeah.
positive outcomes.
Well, I like that. That's my orientation as well. Well, David, this is usually the place in the podcast where I kind of cover the question of now what. This is what is it that leaders or listeners, I should say, can do to take advantage of coaching, and maybe you can give us some general principles for identifying and working with a coach, and then also maybe you could share, what it is that you do and how listeners might be able to get in touch with you.
Sure, sure. It's a really important decision. Who would you want to welcome into your life to be
Mm,
that confident and coach? And much as our world is so technology laden and a few keystrokes on Google, you can get a gazillion coaches coming up. But how do you really know who's good? So I always pride myself on being a little old fashioned. And you know me from history, and I actually allocated a lot of coaches over the years. I never use an algorithm. I'm not an algorithm person. I want to listen to what the client is asking for and then be really intentional and considered in matching that coach to the talent, the person being coached. Yeah, there's a lot of shiny objects out there, a lot of promises from the coaching world, but at the end of the day, it's the quality of relationship that you have with that coach. So somebody who really gels and jives with you, and somebody who is going to ask you the tough questions. It's not all
right.
going to be rose tinted glasses and positive stuff. It's confronting some hard stuff. In terms of my work, I tend to work with people. It can be as short as a free conversations and an assessment, or it can be over 6 months. This stuff takes time. So I like to work with clients over a 6 month period. I'm not limited to individuals as either. I think the biggest lever you can pull is getting out to critical mass in organizations and building a common language for leadership. And I tend to do that around the leadership circle model. So I use the assessment to shine a light on what's working, what's not working, and then give them a solid, robust model that they can use and take action on back in the workplace and hold them accountable for those behaviors.
Sure.
So, sometimes, as you said about Mona on your shoulder, having that coach um, to remind you what you promised and committed to in terms of behavioral actions. My website is circleupcoaching.com, kind of a nod to the intellectual property from Leadership Circle. So it's www.circleupcoaching.com. I'm not big into the social media thing. I do have an Instagram account. I have LinkedIn and I post on that occasionally, but I really want to be that coach who develops potent, real human relationships with the people I'm interacting with because it's too easy to put the glitzy stuff out there on the internet. But
Right.
the moment of truth, Dom, is the first conversation with that coach. Are you feeling it? Do you feel that
Yeah.
that coach really cares about you and it's serving your best interests? It's not about making the coach feel really good, because at the end of the day, you're the person in the hot seat, the person being coached. You're the one who's on the hook for the results. So I wanna show up as a really genuine, caring, empathetic coach who challenges people and helps people be the best they can be. And I have that altruistic motive that I wanna put good into the world, and
Yeah.
no better way than doing that through building better human beings, helping people be better.
Yeah. Well, we resonate on that. I mean, I feel like my purpose in life is to help other people do great things, and so we definitely resonate on that. Yeah, I was wondering if circle up coaching also was sort of a nod to the rugby.
Well, the rugby ball's oval, so
Oh, I was just thinking like how in a scrum, it's almost like everybody gets into this. I mean, it's not a circle exactly, right? But everybody's like together, and interlocked in a sense. So that came to mind as you were saying that. But again, I'm not a rugby player, or never have been. But that just in my mind, that was the image that I got.
yeah, the one analogy I'll riff off that, rugby is a game of hard knocks. And what do you do when you get a hard knock? You get up again.
Right?
So, a lot of what I look at is reactive tendencies from leaders. So when they hit hard times or
Mhm.
get a hard knock, how do you handle that? And
Yeah,
it's not going down that rabbit hole of misery or I'm not good enough. It's rising to the occasion and stepping up and dusting yourself off and getting on with it.
yeah. As you were describing kind of what you do with coaching and how somebody can identify a good coach. What was rolling around in my head was finding somebody that you feel like you could be friends with, but who, and I don't know how to phrase it exactly. It's still in thought in progress, but isn't your friend, right? That,
Mhm.
you haven't become so comfortable that when they challenge you, when they push back on you, that you kind of, we're buddies, not worried about that, right? So
Yeah.
it's recognizing in somebody else that they care, like you were saying, and that you could develop a real meaningful relationship with this person, but then there's still something that allows them to hold you accountable in a way that is different than perhaps typically your buddy might be or something like that.
Care for sure. It's if you ask the question, who's it all about? A great coach works in service of the person that they're coaching. So everything is done with, to borrow again from Greg Thompson, noble intention.
Yeah.
I'm not giving you this feedback. Let's say if there's some negative feedback, I'm not doing it just to grind my ego and show you how smart I am or rub your nose in your worst weakness. I'm pointing out some deficiency that if you correct this, Tom, you will get better.
Yeah.
And that's gotta be done in a sensitive, delicate way. Sometimes it's hard to describe, but you know it when you experience it.
Yeah. Well, David, I think that's a good note to end on. I think this has been really a good conversation. I think it's been informative. Certainly, I've grown from it. Hopefully, our listeners have really gained a lot from it. I really appreciate you being here on the Science of Leadership today.
Likewise, been fun. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Science of Leadership. We hope today's discussion has inspired you and given you valuable insights to help you become a better leader. Remember, leadership is about helping those we lead do great things. It's a journey of continual growth and learning. When we embrace that journey with curiosity, courage, and humility, we can confront challenges, overcome barriers, and foster environments where everyone can succeed. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow or subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with others who are passionate about leadership. Until next week, keep leading with character, competence, caring, and communication. This is Tom Collins. Let's keep growing.